They say experience comes with a cost. Apparently, mine was too expensive. My name is Elias Trent, 54 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I was the unseen architect behind Resolux Systems, the silent force that built and maintained the digital veins that kept their multi-million-dollar property empire running. I wasn't on the billboard. I didn't pose for corporate headshots. But when rent processed on time, when systems ran seamlessly overnight, when crises were avoided before they even made it to an inbox, that was me. I wasn't a star. I was the scaffolding. And scaffolding doesn't get thank you notes. Then came Brendan Cole, a freshly minted CTO with a resume as polished as his cufflinks. He strutted into headquarters like a man auditioning for a TED Talk. Big ideas, bigger buzzwords. Legacy systems are anchors, he declared in his first staff meeting. Time to set this ship free. That was mine. I had coded those systems line by line, shaped them like sculpture, from the days when Resolux was nothing more than a glorified leasing agency in a converted warehouse. No documentation team, no backup staff, just me and 16-hour days, turning duct-taped infrastructure into a symphony of automation and security. Brendan never asked how it worked, never cared. All he saw were the numbers on my paycheck. "We love what you've done, Elias," he said in that rehearsed, saccharine tone only executives and real estate agents master. "But I can get 3 junior engineers for what we pay you. It's not personal, it's just business." Not personal. Just the unraveling of 17 years in a single breath. Diane from HR slid a severance folder across the table like a server delivering a stale apology. 2 months' pay, a thank you letter template, and a clause asking for help during the transition. I nodded, stood up, and shook Brendan's hand. "Sure," I said. "I'll think about it." What I didn't say was that my memory held every undocumented line of custom code, every shortcut I built into the system for resilience, every patch that kept things from collapsing during a server outage. All of it lived in my head, and I wasn't about to hand it over. The next morning, I woke up not to the sound of a conference call or system alert ping, but to silence. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat on the worn leather chair on my back porch, and stared at the lake. It was early, too early, but I wasn't tired. After almost 2 decades of constant motion, early risings, late meetings, system patches that kept me up until 3 a.m., sitting still felt foreign. My inbox wasn't quiet, though. It was filled with rejection emails from companies that didn't quite know where a 54-year-old infrastructure architect fit in their startup culture. Too experienced, too expensive, too something. Always something. But what gnawed at me wasn't unemployment. It was erasure. At Resolux, they hadn't just fired me. They'd wiped me clean like I was a smudge on a glass surface. There were no goodbyes, no all-hands message acknowledging my contributions, 18 years and not even a mention in the company Slack. I checked the internal site. My name was already gone from the directory. Brendan had moved fast. By the following Monday, he'd installed his fresh recruits, 3 junior engineers that looked like they'd just stepped out of a coding boot camp commercial. I recognized the wide eyes, the confidence that came from having read about systems in textbooks, but never had to untangle real-world breakdowns at 2 a.m. when hundreds of residents were locked out of their rent portals. I had nothing against them, but they were being handed a machine they didn't understand. Worse, they didn't even know that they didn't understand it. I watched from afar, curious but detached.
I had no NDA, no non-compete, and no obligation to babysit. They had made their choice. The first week passed quietly. Then came the calls. The first voicemail came from Brendan. His tone was casual, but strained. "Hey, Elias, just a quick question about some authentication issues we're seeing on the maintenance scheduling interface. Probably something simple. Mind giving me a ring back?" I didn't respond. The second voicemail came later that day. More urgency. "Hey again, the new guys are a little stuck. We're hitting some bugs in the tenant payment module. Could use a little insight." Still, I stayed silent. The third call came at night. He sounded tired now. "Look, I know things didn't end the way you wanted, but we could really use your help, just for a consult. Paid, of course." I deleted the message. 2 days later, Diane from HR emailed me, offering $250 an hour for a short-term transitional consult. I read the email twice, let out a low laugh, and archived it. My wife, Laura, placed a hand on my shoulder as I read it. "They'll come crawling," she said, not looking up from her book. "They won't last long enough to crawl," I muttered, staring at the lake again. By day 5, the reports started surfacing on Reddit and LinkedIn. Tenants unable to access portals, maintenance tickets backlogged for days, rent mischarges affecting hundreds of units. An old friend from the finance department forwarded me an internal memo. "System instability due to ongoing architectural migration, vendor response pending." Vendor? There was no vendor. That system was custom built by me. Layered, secured, fine-tuned for the needs of a growing housing firm that once valued stability over buzzwords. But I wasn't gloating. I was angry. They hadn't just let me go. They'd tossed aside 18 years of knowledge, of late-night server patching, of disaster-proofing during a power grid collapse in 2014, of handwritten notes that documented code no one else could follow. They told me I was too expensive. Now they were hemorrhaging revenue and reputation faster than they could hire consultants to cover the damage. And Brendan was calling again. This time, his voice cracked. "Elias, we need you. The system's parts of it are inaccessible. We've got duplicate payments going through. Customer service is overloaded. The new engineers are doing their best, but it's not working. Please, just one call." I didn't answer. Because here's what Brendan still didn't understand. I didn't build that system to be cryptic. I built it to be resilient. But I had begged for years to hire a documentation team. I had written memo after memo warning that we needed redundancies, onboarding guides, institutional knowledge safeguards. Every time I got the same reply, "Too costly, not this quarter." Well, now they were paying the cost, and I was enjoying my morning coffee guilt-free.
I could let it go. Let them sink on their own. Let their careless ignorance swallow the system they once dismissed as too bespoke. But what they did next burned away any trace of pity I might have had left. A week after the tenant portal meltdown made it into a property management newsletter, I got a call, not from Brendan this time, but from someone on Veltria's board. They didn't leave a name, just a terse voicemail. "We're reviewing allegations that the system was designed to be deliberately opaque. If that's true, there may be legal implications." Opaque? Deliberately? I stared at my phone, heart beating slow and cold. That was the spin. That I hadn't built something sophisticated and robust, but that I'd crafted a trap. They were painting me not as the backbone of the company, but as its saboteur. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall. I got to work. Over 18 years, I had sent dozens of emails to upper management. Each time I requested a documentation team, each time I submitted a report outlining system complexity and the risk of insufficient redundancy. I'd written formal proposals with bullet points, budgets, and timelines. They had all been ignored. But they were still in my sent folder. I gathered everything, every internal memo, every Slack message where I explained the architecture to junior staff, every time-stamped ticket where I outlined system risks, every versioned patch note I uploaded to the internal server. I built a timeline, year by year, demonstrating not only my attempts to share institutional knowledge, but also their repeated refusals to support it. And then I opened an email to a man named Marcus Blaine, tech columnist for the Rochester Ledger. A few years ago, he had written a glowing piece on our internal property system, called it a hidden gem of private infrastructure. We'd met for coffee once. He respected clean code and loved a David versus Goliath story. This time, I gave him a Goliath who'd swallowed their own sword. The leak was anonymous, but complete. Within 48 hours, it blew up. The Ledger ran a piece titled "Veltria's Collapse: How One Engineer Warned Them for Years," with screenshots of my emails, quotes from internal proposals, and a clear timeline of decision-making failures. The article went viral on LinkedIn. Tech leaders weighed in. Reddit dev forums turned it into a cautionary tale. And then the floodgates opened. Former colleagues, engineers, product managers, even someone from HR started chiming in. They backed the story. One ex-senior dev revealed she had been pressured to downplay system complexity during investor presentations. A junior analyst posted about how Brendan had mocked the need for documentation in a team meeting, calling it old man paranoia. Within days, the board's narrative collapsed. Brendan disappeared from LinkedIn, his page deactivated. An internal memo leaked next: CTO on administrative leave pending investigation. They had tried to bury me. Now, they were buried under the truth I'd spent nearly 2 decades documenting. But I wasn't done. You see, rage is sharpest when it's quiet, when it's organized, methodical. Not a shout, but a whisper in the right ear at the right time. And I had one more whisper left. Devlin Systems, the company I'd begun consulting for, was quietly exploring acquisitions. I mentioned, offhand during a product planning meeting, Veltria's entire infrastructure is fragile. If someone were to buy their portfolio, they'd need someone who understood both systems. I let it hang. My CEO, Lawrence, raised an eyebrow. Interesting thought. The seed had been planted. That evening, as I looked out over Lake Ontario again, bourbon in hand, Laura joined me. "They tried to blame you?" she asked softly. "They underestimated me," I replied. "That is worse." She smiled, not kindly, but proudly. "I hope they learn something," she said. "They won't," I answered, taking a sip. "But everyone watching them will." 2 weeks after the viral article dismantled Veltria's public image, I received a short email from Aurelius Core, a rapidly scaling prop tech firm based in Minneapolis. Subject line: "Opportunity to build what should have been." At first, I almost ignored it. I'd been flooded with messages, consulting offers, speaking gigs, interview requests. Most were just opportunists riding the wave. But this one was different. It was signed by Celia Rhodes, the CTO. I knew of her. Harvard-educated, battle-tested, sharp as a whip, known for restructuring legacy systems and mentoring engineering teams from scratch. I flew out the next day. The conference room was modern but understated. No faux startup beanbags, no neon signs screaming innovation, just clean diagrams on whiteboards and engineers who looked like they hadn't been sleeping much, and not because of ping-pong tournaments. Celia shook my hand, firmly, and said, "We're not interested in buying code. We're interested in building longevity. We read every one of your internal memos to Veltria. You weren't just writing systems, you were trying to protect them from themselves." I nodded, and failed. She smiled, or laid the foundation for something better. That day, I was offered the role of Chief Infrastructure Officer, with one clear mission: build a system not just to scale, but to last. She gave me full control of team hiring, architecture, documentation mandates, and legacy conversion planning. This wasn't a job, it was a blueprint for redemption. I didn't waste time. My first act was to ban all meetings without a written agenda. My second was to create 2 new teams, documentation and education, equal in budget and status to product and engineering. Every line of code now had to be explained, diagrammed, and demoed in weekly reviews. We didn't build fast, we built clearly. I recruited 2 of my best former colleagues from Veltria: Alan, who knew databases better than anyone, and Mira, a back-end engineer who had always understood how people use the system, not just how it functioned internally. For the first time, we had senior engineers mentoring junior ones not just on syntax, but on intent. We created something called the Continuity Doctrine, a company-wide handbook detailing system logic, user assumptions, failure points, and redundancy protocols. Every engineer who touched production systems was required to write at least 1 paragraph in it weekly. It became our Bible. Meanwhile, Veltria unraveled. Brendan was terminated. A forensic audit revealed that the documentation oversight had been cited in quarterly risk reports he never escalated. Board members were scrambling to reassure investors. The last I heard, they had brought in a crisis PR team and outsourced system recovery to a firm in Tel Aviv. But I wasn't watching. I was building. Aurelia's core system, Aranet, went live 8 months later, on time, under budget, and with 96% test coverage. We didn't launch with a party. We launched with an internal audit, then a failure simulation, then a live client trial. 3 regional housing firms signed on within the first month. When we passed 10,000 active tenants, our uptime tracker still read 100%. But numbers weren't what moved me most. What moved me was walking into our training room and seeing Mira teaching a 23-year-old graduate how to diagram system architecture, not just in Python, but in plain English. What moved me was overhearing Alan laugh as he explained to the new hire, "Don't build it clever, build it clear. That's what Vic taught me." I didn't feel powerful. I felt useful. For the first time in years, I wasn't protecting a brittle system from corporate vanity. I was cultivating resilience through people, through process, through principle. We did weekly retros not to place blame, but to learn. When a minor bug caused a delay in payment processing for 2 properties, the engineer who wrote the faulty module brought it to the next team meeting himself, walking us through his logic and where he'd gone wrong. No shame, no fear, just growth. And that, more than anything, was the difference. Celia pulled me aside one afternoon after a team workshop. "What you're doing here," she said, "this culture of documentation, transparency, mentorship, it's bigger than the codebase." I smiled. "It's what I wish someone had built for me 20 years ago." She nodded. "And now, you're building it for them." 6 months after Aranet's quiet but powerful launch, the acquisition rumors became official. Aurelius Core had purchased Resolux, the rebranded and flailing remains of Veltria. The irony hit me in layers. The very company that had discarded my contributions, cut me loose with a 2-month severance and a smug smirk, was now being folded into the culture I helped build. Only this time, I would be holding the pen. When Celia invited me to accompany her on the first integration tour of the old Veltria HQ, I hesitated. That building held ghosts, not just of systems, but of silence, of meetings where my warnings went unheard, of plans tossed aside in favor of cheaper alternatives, of people who saw cost, not craftsmanship. But I went. The nameplate on the front of the building had been taken down, replaced with a temporary Aurelius Core banner. Inside, the lobby looked almost the same. Sterile, sleek, emotionally vacant. But the faces were different. Most of the executive team was gone. The few who remained kept their distance. My old office was still there, dimly lit, empty. The desk had been cleared out, but the network hub I designed still hummed in the corner. I ran my hand across the glass server rack and smiled faintly. It had survived the chaos. Quiet, efficient, and unnoticed until it broke. Now it was ours. That afternoon, I stood before a room of newly onboarded engineers, some former Veltria staff, others new hires from Aurelius. The orientation session wasn't about technical specs or project timelines. It was about philosophy. "I'm not here to talk about revenge," I said, meeting their eyes. "I'm here to talk about value. The kind that doesn't always show up on balance sheets. The kind that lies in doing things right, slowly, deliberately, with care. You may not always be seen, but if you build something that lasts, you've already made your mark." There was a long pause. Then quiet nods. No applause, just acknowledgement. That night, I called Elaine from the hotel. "It's strange," I said, "walking back into that building and realizing that what hurt me once doesn't anymore. I've moved past it, and maybe that's the real victory." A few weeks later, at our next quarterly strategy meeting, Celia pulled me aside. "We want you to create something lasting," she said. "Not just code, culture, something that outlives even us." She gave me full backing to start the Trent Legacy Fellowship, named after my late mentor who once taught me that good systems are like bridges. You only notice them when they collapse. The fellowship was designed for engineers over 45 who had either left tech due to burnout or been pushed out by ageist hiring practices. We offered stipends, updated training on modern stacks, and most importantly, respect. I personally mentored the first cohort, 5 brilliant minds who had been written off by an industry obsessed with youth. One had helped write early TCP/IP protocols. Another had maintained legacy systems in a rural hospital for decades. Their experiences weren't relics. They were rare metals. And something unexpected happened. Our own engineering team started requesting pair programming sessions with the fellows. Juniors were learning faster. Documentation improved. And during retrospectives, the newer engineers began quoting the fellows' design principles with reverence. Recognition had arrived, not with fanfare, but through impact. One day, while reviewing an infrastructure report, I saw a sticky note from a junior developer I'd only met once. It read, "Build it like Vic would. That's how we make it last." I folded it, put it in my wallet, and carried it home. Some lessons can't be taught. They must be felt. And some victories don't come with trophies. They arrive in quiet moments, when you look back and realize you didn't just survive injustice, you transcended it. I was never after revenge. What I wanted, what I always wanted, was to do meaningful work, to build something that lasted. When Veltria discarded me, they believed they were cutting costs. What they truly cut was the root system of their own stability, and it took collapse for them to see that. But by then, I was gone. already pouring my energy into something new, into Aronet, into people who saw me not as a relic, but as an architect of progress. Every line of code I wrote for Aronet was a declaration. You cannot erase value just because you refuse to see it. When Aurelius acquired Viltria and brought me back to lead the integration, I didn't return to gloat. I returned to rebuild with integrity. I didn't demand apologies. I created standards. I trained new engineers. I mentored those pushed out by time and bias. Because my real legacy isn't in the systems I've built, it's in the people who now build better because of what I once built alone. And the truth? That's the best kind of justice. Because the most powerful recognition is not being asked back. It's knowing you no longer need to go. If you've ever been underestimated, outnumbered, or overlooked, know this. Your quiet strength has more weight than their loud opinions. Leave a comment below if this story resonates with you. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of resilience, respect, and the long road to being seen.